Some men build empires, others conquer hearts. Aristotle Onassis did both, and in the end, lost everything that truly mattered. The man who once commanded the largest private shipping fleet in the world, who married a president's widow, who turned a Greek refugee's determination into billions, spent his final years broken by a tragedy money couldn't prevent. This is the story of how the world's most famous billionaire discovered that all the wealth in the world can't protect you from life's cruelest blows. The burning of Smyrna. September 1922. 16-year-old Aristotle Onassis stood on the deck of a ship, watching his birthplace burn. Smyrna, the cosmopolitan port city where he'd grown up speaking 4 languages and attending prestigious schools, was being consumed by flames as Turkish forces recaptured it from Greek control. The Great Fire of Smyrna wasn't just burning buildings, it was incinerating the Onassis family's fortune, their property holdings, their entire world. Born on January 20th, 1906, in the Karataş suburb of Smyrna, Aristotle had grown up in comfort. His father, Socrates Onassis, was a successful tobacco merchant and shipping entrepreneur with a modest fleet of ships. The family belonged to the city's prosperous Greek community, and young Aristotle attended the local evangelical Greek school, where he learned Greek, Turkish, Spanish, and English by age 16. The future looked bright for a boy with such advantages. Then history intervened. After World War I, Smyrna had become part of Greece, but the Greco-Turkish War of 1919 to 1922 changed everything. When Turkish forces retook the city in September 1922, they set it ablaze. The catastrophe was devastating for the city's Greek population. 3 of Aristotle's uncles, an aunt, her husband, and their daughter were burned to death in a church in Akhisar, where 500 Christians had sought shelter from the advancing fire. The Asia Minor catastrophe of 1922 transformed the Onassis family from comfortable merchants into refugees fleeing with whatever they could carry. The family escaped to Greece, settling in Athens with hundreds of thousands of other Greek refugees from Asia Minor. They had survived, but they'd lost nearly everything. The property, the business connections, the security, all of it gone in smoke and chaos. For young Aristotle, watching his world collapse around him, the lesson was clear and brutal. Nothing is permanent, nothing is safe. The only thing you can rely on is yourself. But there was something else. In losing everything, Aristotle discovered he had nothing left to lose. That liberation, combined with the desperation of a refugee who'd tasted wealth and couldn't bear poverty, created a dangerous combination. A hunger that would drive him to rebuild not just what his family had lost, but to build an empire that would dwarf anything his father had imagined. Within a year, Socrates Onassis had resisted at first, but eventually supported his 16-year-old son's decision to leave Greece and start fresh in Argentina. On August 21st, 1923, Aristotle landed in Buenos Aires with $250 in his pocket and a Nansen passport, the document issued to stateless refugees. He had no connections, no guarantees, no backup plan. Just ambition and the understanding that he'd already survived the worst. Buenos Aires and the birth of a tycoon. Buenos Aires, in 1923, wasn't kind to Greek refugees. Aristotle took whatever work he could find, starting as a hod carrier and dishwasher before landing a job with the British United River Plate Telephone Company as a night shift switchboard operator. The position paid poorly, but it gave him something far more valuable than money. It gave him information. Working the night shift left his days free, and Aristotle used that time to help revive his family's tobacco business. His father and uncle had already founded a tobacco export business in Piraeus, and they began sending Turkish tobacco to Argentina. But young Aristotle needed customers. and Argentine cigarette manufacturers weren't interested in meeting with a teenage refugee. That's when his switchboard position became his secret weapon. Working nights, Aristotle eavesdropped on business calls. He learned about deals being made, contracts being negotiated, opportunities emerging. He used that insider knowledge to set up deals of his own, operating as an important businessman during the day while still working the phone lines in coveralls at night. His big break came in the mid-1920s when he overheard a conversation about a new talking picture where the main character would smoke cigarettes. Aristotle immediately grasped the marketing opportunity. If smoking was about to become glamorous in the new medium of film, cigarette sales would explode. He needed a brand that women would aspire to smoke, something elegant and sophisticated. He approached Juan Gaona, owner of Argentina's most successful cigarette company, stalking him for days until Gaona finally agreed to talk. The audacity worked. Gaona placed an immediate order for $10,000 worth of Turkish tobacco from the Onassis family business. Then, Aristotle took another bold step. He created his own cigarette brand, aimed specifically at women, whose smoking habits were changing as the feminist movement and women's emancipation gained momentum in the interwar period. For his brand ambassador, he persuaded the famous opera singer Claudia Muzio to publicly smoke his cigarettes. The campaign was brilliant. By age 25, Aristotle Onassis was a millionaire, earning over $100,000 from tobacco commissions alone. The Greek government, recognizing his business acumen, made him consul general and asked him to negotiate a trade agreement with Argentina in 1928. He obtained Argentine citizenship in 1929. But Aristotle's ambition didn't stop at tobacco. In 1932, the same year his father died, he made an observation that would change his life. The shipping magnates who hauled the tobacco made more money than the cigarette manufacturers. And 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, was exactly the wrong time to enter the shipping business, which meant it was exactly the right time for someone willing to take risks. While everyone else was fleeing the shipping industry, Aristotle bought 6 freight ships for less than half their normal cost. Other businessmen thought he was insane. The global economy had collapsed. International trade had plummeted. Who buys ships when nobody's shipping anything? But Aristotle understood something they didn't. The depression wouldn't last forever. When the economy recovered, there would be massive demand for shipping, and ship prices would skyrocket. By buying when everyone else was selling, he positioned himself to dominate when the market turned. It was a gamble that would have ruined most men. For Onassis, it was the foundation of an empire. World War II and the supertanker revolution. In 1938, Aristotle commissioned his first oil tanker. By the time World War II broke out, he owned 3. Then he made another brilliant, if morally questionable, decision. He registered his fleet of cargo ships to Panama, giving him tax-free status and dramatically reducing his overhead costs. This made him one of the lowest-cost shipping merchants in the world. During the war, he leased his tankers and other vessels to the Allies. The arrangement was enormously profitable. The Allies desperately needed shipping capacity, and Aristotle offered reduced prices on military equipment in exchange for favorable contracts and protection. His fleet grew, while others' fleets were being sunk by German U-boats. After the war ended, Aristotle purchased 23 surplus Liberty ships from the United States at bargain prices. Then he embarked on the strategy that would make him legendary in the shipping industry. If you want to transport oil economically, you need bigger ships. Much bigger ships. In 1954 alone, he commissioned 17 supertankers. These weren't just large ships. They were revolutionary in scale. capable of transporting massive quantities of oil more efficiently than anything previously built. The economics were staggering. A supertanker could be paid for with a single 6-month lease, meaning the remaining 20 years of the ship's lifespan generated almost pure profit. During the Arab-Israeli Wars in 1956 and 1967, when the Suez Canal closed, Aristotle's supertankers reaped immense profits, transporting oil from the Middle East via the Cape of Good Hope route. While other shipping companies struggled with the longer journey, Aristotle's supertankers made the economics work. By the early 1950s, Aristotle Onassis commanded a fleet larger than the navies of many countries. He was one of only 2 men in the world to own a private airline, the other being Howard Hughes of TWA. His Olympic Airways, acquired in 1957, became known for its golden era of service quality, with gold-plated utensils and candles in first class, and cutting-edge technology like the Comet 4B jets he purchased in 1959. He fought Prince Rainier III for economic control of Monaco through his ownership of the Société des Bains de Mer, which owned the Monte Carlo casino and resort properties. He bought the Greek island of Skorpios for 3.5 million drachmas, transforming it into a private paradise. His yacht, the Christina, named after his daughter, became one of the most famous vessels in the world, serving as his permanent residence and floating palace where the world's elite gathered. But all this wealth, all this power, all this success couldn't prepare Aristotle Onassis for what came next. Because while he was building an empire, he was also building a family that would bring him both his greatest joy and his most devastating pain. Family and the first marriage. On December 28, 1946, 40-year-old Aristotle Onassis married Athena Mary Tina Livanos. She was 17 years old. Tina was the daughter of Stavros G. Livanos, himself a shipping magnate, which made the marriage both a love match and a strategic alliance between 2 powerful Greek shipping families. For Aristotle, marrying into the Livanos family was more than fulfilling his romantic ambitions. It was a blow to his father-in-law and the old money Greek traditionalists who had always held Onassis in low esteem. They saw him as a jumped-up refugee, a clever operator without proper breeding or connections. By marrying Tina Livanos, Aristotle forced them to accept him as family. The couple had 2 children, both born in New York City. Alexander arrived on April 30th, 1948, the same day his father launched an 18,000-ton tanker, the biggest then built in the United States. 5 years later, young Alexander launched a 45,000-ton tanker in Germany, smashing a champagne bottle against the Tina Onassis, named after his mother. Christina was born on December 11th, 1950. For a time, the family projected an image of wealth and happiness. The children took part in grand ceremonies for the fleet's new acquisitions. They traveled between magnificent properties. They wanted for nothing money could buy. But underneath the surface, cracks were already forming. By the mid-1950s, Aristotle and Tina were living separately. According to Onassis biographer Peter Evans, the beginning of the end came when Tina found Aristotle in bed with a friend of hers at their home in Cap d'Antibes, the Château de la Croix. The betrayal shattered whatever remained of their marriage. But Aristotle's infidelity wasn't casual. He had already met the woman who would become the love of his life, the one relationship that would consume him entirely and never fully end. Her name was Maria Callas, and she was the most famous opera singer in the world. Maria Callas, The Great Love Affair. Summer 1957, Venice, Italy. At a party hosted by the famous gossip columnist Elsa Maxwell, Aristotle Onassis met Maria Callas for the first time. Later, he commented to a friend that there was a natural curiosity between them. After all, they were the most famous Greeks alive in the world. Maria Callas born in New York in December 1923 to Greek immigrants, had risen to become opera's greatest soprano. Her voice, her dramatic interpretations, her presence on stage, all of it was legendary. She had reinvented opera for the modern age, bringing emotional intensity and theatrical brilliance that audiences had never seen before. Critics lauded her performances, audiences worshipped her, and the opera world considered her irreplaceable. At the time of their meeting, Callas was married to Giovanni Battista Meneghini, an Italian industrialist 30 years her senior, who also served as her manager. The marriage had given her Italian citizenship in 1949 and provided the stability she needed to establish herself in Italy during the prime years of her career. Meneghini controlled her schedule, her finances, and much of her life, but he had also supported her when she needed it most. Aristotle was still married to Tina, though their relationship had deteriorated into a facade maintained for appearances and the children. The attraction between Aristotle and Maria was immediate, but it would take 2 years before it exploded into the open. In 1959, Aristotle invited Callas and Meneghini for a 3-week Mediterranean cruise aboard his yacht, the Christina. Other illustrious guests included former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his wife, though Callas later remarked that she found Churchill boring. The cruise was supposed to be a sophisticated social gathering among the elite, a carefully curated display of wealth and culture. Instead, it became the beginning of the most public, tempestuous love affair of the decade. From the beginning, the romance was complicated. Callas initially found Onassis over-attentive and unattractive, but his persistent courtship gradually won her over. He pursued her with single-minded determination, using all his considerable charm and the romantic setting of the yacht journey to break down her resistance. For Aristotle, Callas represented something he'd never truly had, someone whose fame matched his own, someone who understood what it meant to be at the pinnacle of achievement, someone whose Greek heritage connected to his own identity in ways no one else could match. For Maria, Aristotle offered escape from a career that had become increasingly difficult. She was suffering from vocal problems and neurological issues that made performing painful. The scandals surrounding her temperamental behavior and the alleged rivalry with soprano Renata Tebaldi had taken their toll. The relentless pressure of maintaining her status as opera's greatest diva was exhausting her. Aristotle offered a way out, a chance to fulfill her life as a woman rather than as a voice in service to art. By the time the 1959 cruise ended, it was evident to everyone aboard, including the alarmed crew and the other guests, that Aristotle and Maria had fallen completely in love. Their daily encounters had ignited passions that neither could hide. Tina Livanos, who had enjoyed Callas's company at the start of the cruise, began to suspect the truth over the course of the journey. By the end, she hastily disembarked the ship, unable to watch her husband's affair unfold before her eyes. The press went wild. Gossip columns had been linking them romantically by the time the cruise began. By the time it ended, the Onassis and Meneghini marriages were clearly finished. In November 1959, Callas left her husband, ending a 10-year marriage. She later claimed publicly that her desire for a movie career had caused the breakup, not her romance with Onassis, but nobody believed the excuse. Tina filed for divorce in the Supreme Court of New York in 1960, citing adultery, the only recognized cause of divorce in New York at that time, and filed for custody of Alexander and Christina. The divorce was granted in June 1960, during the height of Aristotle's well-publicized affair with Callas. What followed was a 9-year relationship that oscillated between bliss and warfare. After both lovers divorced their spouses, They alternately adored and raged at each other. Friends described their relationship as finding excitement in physical altercations and thundering curses. The volatility was extreme, the emotional intensity overwhelming. Maria wanted to retire from the stage, settle down, and have children with Aristotle. She became pregnant in 1960, but lost the baby. According to some biographers, including Nicholas Gage, the child was a boy who died hours after birth on March 30th, 1960. The loss devastated her, but Aristotle was away when it happened, adding to her pain. She conceived again in 1963, but lost that baby as well, again while Aristotle was away. This time, when she needed him most, he was hosting Jacqueline Kennedy and her sister Lee Radziwill aboard the Christina. The timing was cruel. Some sources claim she became pregnant a third time in 1966, but terminated the pregnancy at Aristotle's request, though this was never publicly confirmed. The relationship was deeply dysfunctional in ways that became increasingly clear as the years passed. Callas, despite her fame and talent, had little self-esteem when it came to personal relationships. She had grown up with a domineering mother who pushed her relentlessly towards success. Her marriage to Meneghini had been controlling. Now, with Aristotle, she found herself in another relationship where she held little power. Aristotle held all the power, controlling her emotionally while refusing to marry her, even after both had divorced their spouses. He was attracted to her celebrity, which provided him with status and validation. He liked being seen with the world's greatest opera singer. But he wasn't ready to make the commitment she desperately wanted. Why wouldn't he marry her? The reasons were complex. Partly he enjoyed the freedom of their arrangement. Partly he still harbored ambitions that required different partnerships. And partly, having grown up watching his world burn, he had developed an aversion to permanent commitments. Everything could be lost in a moment. Everything could burn. Why trap yourself? Callas described her lover as the first person to truly understand and accept her, warts and all. She played a nurturing role in his life, something he had never experienced with anyone else. His relationship with his mother had been cut short by her early death in 1912. Tina had never nurtured him in this way. Maria did, creating a dynamic that was part romance, part maternal care, wholly consuming. But his treatment of her was often cruel, in ways both calculated and casual. At JFK's birthday celebration at Madison Square Garden in 1962, Maria attended and even performed, but the event is now remembered only for Marilyn Monroe's sultry rendition of "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" in her skin-tight, bejeweled gown. Aristotle attended with Maria, but he told her afterward that no one cared about Monroe's voice, just as no one cared about Callas's body. The comment was devastating, reducing her artistry to nothing while elevating Monroe's sex appeal over her own. Maria largely abandoned her career for Aristotle. Her vocal problems accelerated, her performances became rarer, and her focus shifted entirely to the relationship. When Franco Zeffirelli asked her in 1963 why she hadn't practiced her singing, she responded that she had been trying to fulfill her life as a woman. The great Maria Callas, who had commanded opera stages worldwide and reinvented the art form, had subordinated everything to a man who wouldn't marry her. In 1960, they appeared in public together throughout the year, no longer hiding their relationship. Photographers captured them holding hands, dining together, living openly as a couple. While dating Maria, Aristotle purchased the island of Skorpios, creating a private paradise where they could escape the world. It seemed like the relationship might stabilize, might evolve into the marriage Maria wanted. But Aristotle remained non-committal. Years passed. Maria waited. And then, In 1963, everything changed. On the Christina, Aristotle hosted a gathering attended by Princess Lee Radziwill and her sister, Jacqueline Kennedy. Lee was rumored to be having an affair with Aristotle, and Maria noticed his overt attention to both sisters. By this point, she had reached a détente about his infidelity. She accepted that he would never be faithful, that his need for conquest extended beyond her. After President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed on November 22, 1963, Jacqueline entered a period of deep grief. In August 1963, she had lost her newborn son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy. Now she had lost her husband to an assassin's bullet. Lee Radziwill, sensitive to her sister's pain and perhaps eager to show her own connection to Aristotle, invited Jackie to join her on the Christina to recuperate. At the end of that voyage, the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Aristotle gave Jackie a diamond necklace. He gave Lee a bracelet so insignificant that she later sniped that not even 6-year-old Caroline would wear the thing. The message was clear. Aristotle had made his choice, but it would take 5 more years before he acted on it. 5 years of continued relationship with Maria, continued meetings, continued promises that never quite materialized into the commitment she wanted. 5 years of Aristotle pursuing Jackie Kennedy with careful discretion while maintaining his relationship with Maria. Maria watched it all unfold, powerless to stop it, clinging to the hope that Aristotle would eventually choose her. After all, they were both Greek. They understood each other. They shared a connection that transcended the superficial attractions of wealth and fame. Surely that meant something. Surely he would realize what they had together. She was wrong. And when Aristotle finally announced his intention to marry Jacqueline Kennedy in 1968, the news nearly destroyed Maria Callas completely. The Jackie Kennedy marriage, October 20th, 1968. On Skorpios, Aristotle Onassis's private Greek island, the billionaire married Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, widow of the 35th President of the United States. The marriage shocked the world and nearly destroyed Maria Callas. Before the wedding, an agreement was reached between Onassis and Ted Kennedy, Jacqueline's former brother-in-law. Jackie would receive $3 million plus $1 million for each of her 2 children, Caroline and John Jr., to compensate for the $150,000 she received from the Kennedy Family Trust, which she would lose by remarrying. Upon Aristotle's death, she would continue to receive $150,000 each year for the rest of her life. The marriage made sense on paper. Aristotle was a collector of beautiful and famous women, and Jackie Kennedy was the most famous woman in the world. Marrying her elevated his status to heights even his shipping empire couldn't reach. For Jackie, Aristotle offered security, privacy, and escape from the constant media scrutiny in America. Her children would have protection, and she would have freedom to live life on her own terms. But the marriage was troubled from the start. During their time together in Acapulco, their relationship deteriorated so badly that Aristotle handwrote his will on a private jet, stipulating that if Jackie contested it, she would receive only the minimal spousal bequest dictated by Greek law, 12.5%, and would be responsible for all legal fees. The couple inhabited 6 residences: her 15-room apartment at 1045th Avenue in New York City, her horse farm in New Jersey, his apartment at 88 Avenue Foch in Paris, his house in Athens, his house on Skorpios, and his yacht, Christina. Despite the wealth and properties, they spent increasingly little time together, and Maria Callas never really left the picture. According to Onassis's private secretary and other close associates, even while married to Jackie, Aristotle frequently met with Maria in Paris. They resumed what had become a clandestine affair, picking up where they'd left off. He allegedly told Maria that he had realized she was the true love of his life. But by then, it was too late to repair what he had broken. The marriage to Jackie, according to many in Aristotle's Greek circle, was an act of hubris that the gods would punish. And punish him they did, with a cruelty that would break the man who had survived the burning of Smyrna, poverty, war, and every business challenge the world could throw at him. The death of Alexander. January 22nd, 1973. Athens. 24-year-old Alexander Onassis arrived at Ellinikon International Airport for what should have been a routine test flight. As president of Olympic Aviation, a subsidiary of his father's Olympic Airways, Alexander was overseeing pilot instruction for Donald McCusker, a potential new recruit. Alexander had earned his pilot's license in 1967 and accumulated 1,500 flying hours. His poor eyesight meant he couldn't hold an air transport license, but he could possess a commercial pilot certificate, allowing him to fly light planes and air taxis for emergency medical cases. He loved flying. It was one of the few things in his life that was truly his own, separate from his father's overwhelming influence. Alexander's relationship with his father had always been complicated. He and his sister Christina had been devastated by their parents' divorce in 1960, then horrified when their father married Jacqueline Kennedy in 1968. Alexander reportedly said about the marriage that his father loved the names and Jackie loved the money. The resentment ran deep. To make matters worse, Alexander was in a secret relationship with Fiona Campbell Walter, the former wife of Baron Hans Heinrich Thyssen Bornemisser de Cachan. She was 16 years older than Alexander, beautiful, wealthy, and independent. Aristotle disapproved intensely. During the last year before his death, Alexander had serious confrontations with his father about both business matters at Olympic Airlines and his relationship with Fiona. He had announced to Aristotle that he would soon be leaving the company and marrying Fiona, determined to escape his father's unbearable psychological pressures and manipulations. On that January afternoon, Alexander boarded his personal Piaggio P136L2, amphibious aircraft with McCusker and Donald McGregor, his regular pilot, who was recovering from an eye infection. The plan was to practice amphibious landings between the Saronic Gulf Islands of Aegina and Poros. A few seconds after takeoff from runway 33, the plane's right wing dropped and stayed down. The plane crashed, losing control in a flight lasting no more than 15 seconds. All 3 men aboard suffered serious injuries. Alexander was rushed first to the American military base hospital near the airport, then to the KAT hospital in Athens. Aristotle was in New York City when he received the news. According to witnesses, he collapsed from the shock before swiftly making his way to the airport. The following day, January 23rd, he arrived in Athens with Jackie and went directly to the hospital. Alexander's mother, Tina, arrived from Switzerland with her new husband, Stavros Niarchos, Aristotle's chief business and social rival, who had married Tina after her divorce from Aristotle. Aristotle flew English neurosurgeon Alan Richardson from London to Athens, but Richardson told him what he didn't want to hear. Alexander had suffered serious cranial cerebral injuries. He had no chance of surviving. At 7 p.m. on January 23rd, 1973, 27 hours after the crash, Alexander Onassis died. The forensic diagnosis was severe brain hemorrhage from the injuries sustained in the accident. Miraculously, the 2 American pilots who had been with Alexander suffered only relatively minor injuries. The discrepancy haunted Aristotle. He refused to believe it was an accident. His son, a skilled pilot with 1,500 hours of experience, dies in a 15-second flight while the other 2 men survive. Impossible. It had to be sabotage. It had to be murder. Aristotle considered having Alexander's body cryogenically frozen, but was persuaded against it. Instead, Alexander was embalmed by Desmond Henley and buried next to the chapel on Scorpios. The private island that had been the setting for so much happiness now held the body of Aristotle's only son. Less than a month after Alexander's death, manslaughter proceedings were initiated against McCusker. In January 1974, 6 people were charged in connection with the crash, with indictments indicating that faulty controls had been fitted to the plane. Aristotle blamed everyone. The CIA, the Greek military junta leader Georgios Papadopoulos, Stavros Niarchos, even Olympic Airways employees. In December 1974, Aristotle took out a paid advertisement offering a $1 million reward for proof that Alexander's death had been the result of deliberate action rather than negligence. The official inquiry had concluded it was an accident caused by faulty controls installed during maintenance. Aristotle didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. Accepting that his son's death was a meaningless accident, a random mechanical failure, would mean it was pointless, unfair, a waste. The reward was never paid. All charges were later dropped. In 1978, 3 years after Aristotle's death, McCusker was awarded $800,000 by Olympic Airways. The official cause remained what it had always been: reversed aileron connecting cables during the installation of a new control column during maintenance. But for Aristotle Onassis, the truth didn't matter. His son was dead. His heir was gone. The boy he had groomed to take over the empire, to carry the Onassis name into the future, was buried on an island in Greece, 24 years old and never to grow older. Aristotle never recovered. He had survived wars, business rivalries, the destruction of his childhood home, poverty and exile. But he could not survive the death of his son, the final collapse. After Alexander's death, Aristotle Onassis aged overnight. Friends and associates reported that the vibrant, energetic man they'd known became a shell. He had always been superstitious, and now those superstitions consumed him. He believed Jackie had brought a curse on the family. Both John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. Now his son was dead. The pattern seemed obvious to him. His relationship with Jackie deteriorated completely. She spent less and less time with him, preferring her life in New York to the grief-stricken man who blamed her for his son's death. The marriage that had shocked the world became an empty arrangement. 2 people bound by a contract neither wanted anymore. Christina, his daughter, made it clear that she disliked Jackie intensely. She supported her father's belief that Jackie had brought some kind of curse into the family. The household became toxic, filled with suspicion, grief, and resentment. Aristotle's health began to fail. He had suffered from respiratory problems for years, but now they worsened dramatically. His business empire, once his greatest pride, lost its appeal. What was the point of building an empire if there was no son to inherit it? What was the point of any of it? Maria Callas, the woman he had abandoned for Jackie Kennedy, became his comfort again. They spent time together in Paris, reconnecting in ways they hadn't in years. Aristotle reportedly told Maria that he had realized she was the true love of his life. But the recognition came too late. The damage was done, and time was running out. In early 1975, Aristotle's condition worsened severely. He checked into the American hospital in Paris, bringing with him a red cashmere Hermes blanket that Maria had given him. Even at the end, surrounded by doctors and nurses, he clung to that physical reminder of the woman he had truly loved. On March 15, 1975, at age 69, Aristotle Onassis died of respiratory failure in Neuilly-sur-Seine, near Paris. The man who had built the largest private shipping fleet in the world, who had married a president's widow, who had amassed a fortune so vast that he was one of the few billionaires when that term actually meant something, died in a hospital bed, broken by grief and illness. He was buried on Scorpios, the island he had bought during his relationship with Maria Callas, next to his son Alexander. Later, his sister Artemis would be buried there as well. And in 1988, Christina would join them after dying of a heart attack at age 37 in Buenos Aires. After Aristotle's death, Christina settled with Jackie for $25 million in exchange for Jackie not contesting the will. Jackie received her agreed-upon payments for the rest of her life. Christina inherited 55% of her father's fortune, then estimated at $500 million. The remaining 45% funded the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation, established in memory of the son who had died too young. Maria Callas never recovered from Aristotle's death. She had sacrificed her career, her voice, her health, all for a man who had married someone else, but never stopped loving her. On September 16, 1977, at age 53, she died alone and isolated in her Paris apartment of a heart attack. In 1979, her ashes were scattered off the coast of Scorpios, finally resting near the man who had been both her greatest love and her greatest pain. The legacy. Aristotle. Onassis spent his life accumulating wealth and power on a scale few humans ever achieve. He built an empire from nothing, surviving catastrophes that would have destroyed lesser men. He married into shipping aristocracy, then married into American royalty. He owned an airline, controlled a casino, commanded a fleet larger than many nations' navies. He moved through the world as if he owned it. But in the end, none of it mattered. All the money couldn't save his son from a 15-second flight that ended in disaster. All the power couldn't prevent the slow deterioration of his health. All the fame couldn't fill the emptiness left by Alexander's death. His daughter Christina inherited his empire, but not his strength. She married 4 times, each marriage ending in divorce. She battled weight problems, depression, and the inability to find lasting happiness despite wealth beyond imagination. When she died at 37, the empire passed to her daughter, Athena Onassis Roussel, who was only 3 years old. The Christina yacht was eventually sold and converted into a floating museum. Olympic Airways was returned to the Greek government and went through various transformations. The Scorpios island remained in the family until it was eventually sold decades later. The properties, the businesses, the empire, all of it scattered and dissolved. What remains is the story. The refugee who became a billionaire. The man who loved Maria Callas but married Jackie Kennedy. The tycoon who built an empire but couldn't protect his son. The legend who discovered too late that wealth is meaningless without the people you love. In his handwritten will, composed during that Acapulco trip with Jackie when their relationship was already crumbling, Aristotle left instructions for what would become the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation. It remains active today, supporting initiatives in education, medicine, and culture. The foundation promotes Greek culture worldwide, funds scholarships for Greek university students, and awards prizes for achievement in various fields. It's a fitting legacy for a man who rose from the ashes of Smyrna to build something extraordinary. But anyone who knew Aristotle Onassis in his final years would tell you that he would have traded it all, every dollar, every ship, every property and possession, for one more day with his son. Some empires fall to invaders, some collapse under their own weight. Aristotle Onassis's empire survived him, but the man himself fell to grief. He had conquered the business world and lost the battle that truly mattered. and that's the loneliest fall of all. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. Some royals are born for the throne. Others choose a completely different path. Princess Irene of Greece spent 83 years in the shadow of her sister, Queen Sophia of Spain. She never married, never had children, never sought power. But her story reveals something far more compelling than the quiet figure trailing behind European royalty at state events. From concert stages to Hindu temples, from military coups to humanitarian missions, this is the life of a princess who defied every expectation. Born in exile. May 11th, 1942. Cape Town, South Africa. While World War II raged across Europe, a baby girl was born thousands of miles from her homeland. Princess Irene entered the world in exile, the youngest child of Crown Prince Paul of Greece and Princess Frederica of Hanover. Her older siblings, Princess Sophia and Prince Constantine, had already experienced the upheaval of royal displacement when Nazi forces invaded Greece in 1941. The family's exile wasn't comfortable obscurity. They lived in a rented home in Claremont, moving between South Africa and Egypt as the war continued. Young Irene's christening took place 3 weeks after her birth, with 10 godparents, including General Jan Smuts, the Prime Minister of South Africa, and Queen Mary of the United Kingdom. The gathering spoke to the interconnected web of European royalty, even in displacement. In 1944, when Irene was just 2 years old, the family relocated to Egypt. 2 years later, they finally returned to Greece after a referendum approved the continuity of the monarchy. Irene was 4 when she first saw her homeland, a country she would later be forced to leave again. The early displacement marked her. Unlike children raised in stable palaces with centuries of tradition around them, Irene's first memories were of movement, adaptation, and the understanding that royal status offered no protection against history's upheavals. But the family's fortunes were about to change dramatically. The princess comes home. In 1947, everything shifted. King George II of Greece died, and Irene's father ascended to the throne as King Paul. Suddenly, the exiled family became Greece's ruling monarchy. 5-year-old Irene transformed overnight from a displaced child into a princess of a restored kingdom. Life at the royal palace brought structure and tradition. Irene attended the Arsakion school at Sikiko Palace in Greece, then later Schule Schloss Salem in Baden-Württemberg, Germany, the same institution her sister Sophia had attended. The German boarding school emphasized character development and outdoor activities, a stark contrast to the sheltered existence of many European princesses. Music filled their home. The Greek royal family kept gramophones playing in every room, and Handel's Messiah drifted through open windows so often that both Irene and Sophia memorized it completely. Their father, King Paul, possessed remarkable musical talent and could have pursued a career as a concert pianist had his royal birth not determined a different path. This musical environment shaped Irene profoundly. While Sophia excelled in athletics, even becoming a reserve member of the Greek sailing team for the 1960 Rome Olympics, Irene gravitated toward the piano. But she wouldn't pick up the instrument seriously until 1962, when she was 20 years old. What came first was a different kind of education. Together with her sister Sophia and archaeologist Theophano Arvanitopoulou, Irene conducted archaeological surveys at Dekelia, collecting pottery fragments from various periods. In 1960, the 3 women co-published Archaeological Digest, a scholarly work that demonstrated both sisters' serious intellectual capabilities. This wasn't amateur dabbling. It was legitimate archaeological research conducted by trained minds. But the calm of intellectual pursuits existed against an increasingly unstable political backdrop, and Irene's privileged world was about to fracture again. The piano and the prodigy. In 1962, at age 20, Princess Irene made a decision that would define the next phase of her life. She took up the piano, studying under Gina Bakawa, the legendary Greek-born concert pianist who had studied with Sergei Rachmaninoff himself. The commitment was total. Irene gave up karate, which had been a childhood passion, to protect her hands. Bakawa, known as the Queen of Pianists, didn't accept students lightly. She saw something in Irene beyond royal novelty, a genuine dedication that manifested in 7-hour daily practice sessions. The princess approached music with an intensity that surprised even her demanding teacher. Her father, King Paul, had actually played piano duets with Bakawa before the war. When Irene began studying with the celebrated pianist, it created a full-circle connection. Bakawa even gave lessons to King Paul, maintaining the family's deep engagement with classical music. Then, in March 1964, tragedy struck. King Paul died after an illness, and 23-year-old Constantine ascended to the throne as King Constantine II. This sudden shift placed Irene in an unexpected position. From March 6, 1964, until July 10, 1965, she was crown princess and heir presumptive to the Greek throne. If anything had happened to her bachelor brother during that 15-month period, Irene would have become Queen of Greece. But on July 10, 1965, her niece, Princess Alexia, was born, and Irene stepped back from the direct line of succession. The role had never suited her anyway. She had other ambitions, ones that had nothing to do with crowns. In 1965, Bakawa oversaw Irene's debut recital in Athens. Critics noted her admirable technique, lively sense of rhythm, and perhaps most importantly, her ability to convey intensity of feeling. This wasn't a princess playing at being a musician. This was a musician who happened to be a princess. In 1967, Irene and Bakawa embarked on a tour of the United States, performing in Salt Lake City, Seattle, Cincinnati, and Dallas. American journalists were fascinated by the concept of a European royal doing something productive with her life. Irene told them simply that she had always wanted to be a musician, that she would always play music. The tour demonstrated that she could hold her own professionally. Bakawa, despite being a close friend of the family, made clear that she would not hesitate to tell anyone if she felt Irene was anything less than professional. The validation came from one of the world's finest pianists, and it meant everything. But back home, Greece was collapsing into political chaos that would soon scatter the royal family once more. Coup and exile. April 21st, 1967. Military tanks rolled through Athens in the pre-dawn darkness. A group of colonels seized control of Greece, establishing a military dictatorship that would last 7 years. King Constantine II initially remained as head of state, but the situation was impossible. The military junta wielded the real power, using the king as a figurehead while systematically dismantling democratic institutions. The regime arrested thousands of political opponents, established censorship, and ruled through fear. Constantine found himself in an impossible position, maintaining the appearance of authority while having none. His every move was watched, his every decision second-guessed by the colonels who truly controlled the country. On December 13, 1967, Constantine attempted a counter-coup against the military regime. He and loyalist officers tried to mobilize military units that remained faithful to the crown. The plan was bold, but poorly executed. Within hours, it became clear that the attempt had failed catastrophically. The king, his family, and those loyal to him fled into exile. Irene, at 25 years old, left Greece for the second time in her life, this time as an adult who understood exactly what was being lost. The family scattered across Europe. Constantine and his wife, Queen Anne-Marie, eventually settled in London, where they would spend decades as a government in exile, hosting other Greek royalists and maintaining connections to a homeland that no longer wanted them. Sophia was already in Spain, having married Juan Carlos in 1962, navigating the complexities of Franco's regime while waiting for the promised restoration of the Spanish monarchy. And Irene's mother, Queen Frederica, the formidable matriarch of the family who had guided them through exile during World War II, made an unexpected choice that shocked European royal circles. Frederica went to India, and Irene went with her. The decision seemed incomprehensible to those who knew the family. Greece was in crisis. Constantine was organizing resistance from exile, trying to maintain international support for the restoration of the monarchy. The family needed unity, needed to present a strong front against the military dictatorship. Instead, the Dowager Queen disappeared to pursue Hindu philosophy in a country thousands of miles from European power centers. But Frederica had long been drawn to Eastern spirituality. The formal structures of Orthodox Christianity, while deeply important to her, couldn't answer certain questions that troubled her. She sought something beyond doctrine, beyond ritual. India, with its ancient spiritual traditions and emphasis on inner transformation, offered answers that Greek orthodoxy couldn't provide. Irene didn't hesitate to join her mother. The relationship between them was profound, built on years of exile, shared intellectual curiosity, and a recognition that they both existed slightly outside the conventional expectations of royal life. Frederica encouraged Irene's unconventional interests, her musical ambitions, her refusal to conform. Going to India together was a natural extension of their bond. In Madras, now Chennai, they found Dr. T.M.P. Mahadevan, one of India's most respected philosophers and scholars. Mahadevan was director of the Centre for Advanced Study in Philosophy at Madras University, a man whose work bridged Eastern and Western philosophical traditions. He studied comparative religion with rigorous academic discipline, drawing parallels between Vedanta philosophy and European philosophical traditions. Irene enrolled in formal studies under Mahadevan's guidance. This wasn't tourism or spiritual dabbling. She attended lectures, participated in seminars, read extensively in Sanskrit philosophy. She studied the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the works of Shankara. She learned to see connections between the mystical traditions of Orthodox Christianity, the fathers of the church she had grown up reading, and the philosophical frameworks of Hindu thought. Mahadevan recognized in Irene a serious student, someone whose royal status was irrelevant to the intellectual work at hand. He pushed her to think rigorously, to question assumptions, to engage deeply with texts. Their relationship evolved from teacher and student to genuine friendship built on mutual respect. As Mahadevan aged and his health declined, he began dictating his memoirs to Irene. The project took months, with Irene carefully recording his words, asking clarifying questions, helping him articulate a lifetime of philosophical inquiry. The trust implicit in this arrangement spoke volumes. Mahadevan was entrusting his intellectual legacy to a Greek princess who could have easily returned to Europe and forgotten about him. But Irene didn't forget. Years later, long after Mahadevan's death, she became vice president of the Dr. T.M.P. Mahadevan Foundation. The foundation published his works, promoted Indian educational and cultural projects, and maintained his scholarly legacy. She helped establish an international library at Madras University, ensuring that students and scholars would have access to the resources Mahadevan had valued. She also facilitated cultural exchanges between India and Europe, bringing Indian scholars to speak at European institutions and helping European students access Indian universities for philosophical studies. The work was unglamorous and largely unnoticed by the media that followed European royalty, but it mattered to Irene more than any state function she might have attended. Irene's time in India marked a profound spiritual transformation. She didn't convert to Hinduism in any formal sense, though some observers believed she had. She never abandoned Orthodox Christianity or denied her religious heritage. Instead, she found a way to hold multiple spiritual traditions simultaneously, seeing them as different paths toward the same ultimate truth. She practiced yoga daily, adopting an Eastern lifestyle that included vegetarian eating, meditation, and a disciplined approach to physical and mental health. These practices would stay with her for the rest of her life, even after she left India. When she eventually settled in Madrid, she maintained her Eastern disciplines, an unusual sight in the formal world of European royalty, where tradition and conformity were prized above individual spiritual exploration. But while Irene found enlightenment in Madras and dedicated herself to philosophical studies, her piano career was quietly ending. The demands of daily practice, the need for constant work with a teacher, the structure that Gina Bachauer had provided, all of this was impossible to maintain while living in India and pursuing philosophical studies. Yet one more performance awaited, one that would be her most memorable. The Royal Festival Hall, June 1969. London's Royal Festival Hall. The audience filled with European royalty, packed into the ceremonial box, while Greek shipping magnates' bejeweled wives filled the stalls. Princess Irene of Greece and her teacher Gina Bachauer were about to perform Bach's concerto for two pianos with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra under conductor Max Rudolph. The evening was unusual by any measure. A Greek princess performing professionally while members of various European royal families watched from the audience. Then Prince Charles and Princess Anne were in attendance. The event attracted intense media scrutiny, not for scandal, but for the sheer novelty of a royal doing something genuinely artistic at a professional level. The critics were impressed. The Evening Standard noted that Irene had admirable technique, lively rhythm, judgment, and could convey intensity of feeling. When she took her bow, she received no fewer than a dozen bouquets of flowers. In 1971, Irene returned to the United States with Bachauer for another tour, this time to help the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, which was experiencing severe financial difficulties. The novelty of a princess at the keyboard, combined with Bachauer's popularity, brought in a huge audience and raised $100,000 for the struggling orchestra. They performed Mozart's Piano Concerto for two pianos in E-flat. The same year, they performed at Windsor Castle with Yehudi Menuhin conducting, with Princess Alexandra and Lord Mountbatten in the audience. Irene and her mother, Queen Frederica, were much in evidence at that Windsor festival. At one post-concert party, a bachelor Eton master was somewhat taken aback to discover that the attractive young woman he'd been chatting up was a Greek princess. Then, in August 1976, Gina Bachauer died suddenly in Athens at age 63. She collapsed during the Athens festival, and despite efforts to save her, passed away. For Irene, the loss was devastating. Bachauer wasn't just her teacher, she was her mentor, her validator, her connection to a professional musical world that accepted her on merit rather than title. After Bachauer's death, Irene's musical career floundered. She spoke of pursuing studies with Nadia Boulanger in Paris or at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, but neither materialized. The driving force was gone. Without Bachauer's structure and guidance, Irene drifted away from professional performance, music would remain important to her. She later established the Gina Bacauer Awards in 2004, sponsored by her organization World in Harmony in collaboration with the Athens Concert Hall. The awards reflected both her love for music and her belief that many talented musicians are never recognized due to lack of support. But her own performing days were over, and by 1981, Irene's life was about to change direction entirely. The move to Madrid, February 1981. Queen Frederica died at age 63 in Madrid, where she had been living with her daughter Sofia, now Queen of Spain. The loss hit Irene hard. Her mother had been her closest companion through exile, through India, through the spiritual searching that defined their relationship. Irene went to Madrid for the funeral. She intended to stay 5 days. She stayed 5 years, then 10, then permanently. Later, Irene explained to Spanish journalist Pilar Urbano that she came to Madrid for 5 days and stayed 5 years. And as time went by, she understood that her place was by Sofia's side. The decision made sense on multiple levels. Greece was still under the aftershocks of the dictatorship, which had finally ended in 1974 when it collapsed following the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. A 1974 referendum abolished the monarchy entirely. Constantine would never reign again. There was no role for Irene in Greece beyond being a former princess of a defunct institution. In Spain, however, her sister ruled as queen consort. Juan Carlos had become King of Spain in 1975 after Franco's death, and Sofia was his queen. The Spanish monarchy was stable, respected, and Sofia needed her sister. Irene moved into a simple apartment at the Palace of Zarzuela in Madrid, the residence of the Spanish royal family. The apartment was modest by royal standards, a single room with basic furnishings. Irene, despite being the daughter, sister, and aunt of kings, had no interest in luxury. In later years, she stopped wearing jewelry entirely, a striking choice for someone with access to royal collections. Her role in Spain was undefined by any official protocol. She wasn't Spanish royalty. She had no title within the Spanish system. She was simply the Queen's sister, a position that carried family importance but no state function. Irene once said that she had no status, that she was the Queen's sister and nothing more, and she was not an official. Sofia and the King were the official representatives, not her. But unofficially, Irene became something more important. She became a surrogate mother to Sofia's 3 children, Infanta Elena, Infanta Cristina, and Felipe, the current King of Spain. The children called her Aunt Pecu, short for peculiar. The nickname, which Irene embraced with good humor, acknowledged what everyone in the family recognized. She was the eccentric one, and she wore that eccentricity proudly. The peculiar princess. Irene's interests ranged far beyond what was considered acceptable or normal for European royalty. She was fascinated by paranormal phenomena, occultism, parapsychology, and extraterrestrial life. These weren't passing curiosities. She pursued them seriously, studying and reading extensively on topics that made more conservative family members uncomfortable. Her Hindu philosophy studies continued. She practiced yoga, followed an Eastern lifestyle, and avoided eating meat. The combination of spiritual discipline and unconventional interests made her an outlier in European royal circles, where tradition and conformity were prized above individual exploration. She never married, a conscious choice she discussed openly in later years. In a rare 2007 interview for her biography, Irene of Greece, the Rebel Princess, she declared that she didn't regret not having children, that she was a revolutionary. The statement was remarkable for its directness. Royal women were expected to marry and produce heirs. Irene rejected that expectation entirely. Her family teased her about being peculiar, but it came from affection rather than criticism. Sophia, despite being queen and living in the formal world of state protocol, never tried to change her sister. The bond between them was deep and unshakable. This bond was tested dramatically during one terrifying night in February 1981. The night of the coup, February 23rd, 1981. Irene was at the Palace of Zarzuela with King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia when armed civil guard Lieutenant Colonel Antonio Tejero burst into the Spanish Congress of Deputies with 200 armed officers, firing shots into the air and holding the entire Spanish government hostage. The coup attempt, known as 23F, aimed to overthrow Spain's young democracy and restore authoritarian rule. As shots rang out in the Congress building and tanks rolled through Valencia, the royal palace became a command center. Juan Carlos, who had been installed by Franco but had carefully steered Spain toward democracy, spent the night making phone calls to military commanders, reminding them of their oath of loyalty to the crown. For Irene and Sophia, trapped in the palace, the terror was compounded by memory. They had lived through this before. On April 21st, 1967, they had experienced a military coup in Greece. They knew exactly how these situations could end, how quickly royal families could be scattered, or worse. Years later, Irene recounted the fear they both experienced that night, remembering the Greek coup and wondering if they would have to flee into exile again. Sophia was queen, but that meant nothing if the military decided otherwise. They had grown up understanding that crowns offered no real protection. Juan Carlos's steady leadership throughout that night prevented the coup from succeeding. By morning, he had secured the loyalty of key military commanders, and the coup collapsed. Democracy survived. But the experience left its mark on both sisters. They had now lived through coups in two different countries, both times wondering if they would wake up as refugees, whirled in harmony. In 1985, the European Union introduced a program to slaughter cows to curb milk overproduction. The economics made sense to bureaucrats in Brussels. Europe was producing too much milk, driving down prices and creating surpluses that cost money to store. The solution, from a purely financial perspective, was to reduce the number of dairy cows. For Irene, the waste was unconscionable. Healthy, productive cows being killed while children in developing nations suffered from malnutrition made no sense. The disconnect between European agricultural policy and global hunger struck her as a moral failure of staggering proportions. She launched an initiative that was audacious in its scope and complexity. Instead of slaughtering the cows, why not transport them to places where they were desperately needed? India, with its sacred regard for cattle and its massive population of malnourished children, seemed like the obvious destination. The logistics were nightmarish. Transporting thousands of cows across continents required coordinating with multiple governments, agricultural agencies, shipping companies, and Indian organizations. There were veterinary requirements, import regulations, quarantine protocols. The costs were enormous. And Irene funded much of it herself, using her personal resources and relentlessly fundraising from contacts across Europe. The project succeeded. Thousands of surplus cows from Europe and the United States were shipped to India, where they provided milk for malnourished children instead of being destroyed. The cows that would have been slaughtered for economic policy instead became life-saving resources for communities that desperately needed them. The success of that project sparked something in Irene. She had found her calling, her purpose beyond being the queen's sister or the princess without a throne. She could use her connections, her resources, her royal platform for something that actually mattered. In 1986, she founded World in Harmony, establishing it as a formal humanitarian organization based in Madrid. The organization's stated mission was to find practical ways to show solidarity with those in need and compassion for animals. But the scope quickly expanded, far beyond cow transportation. World in Harmony helped establish schools in rural Africa and South Asia, working with local communities to identify needs and develop sustainable educational infrastructure. These weren't showcase projects designed for publicity. They were practical, unglamorous efforts to provide basic education in places where none existed. The organization also established medical centers, focusing on preventative care and basic health services in regions without access to modern medicine. Irene understood that expensive, high-tech solutions weren't what these communities needed. They needed clean water, basic sanitation, vaccination programs, and trained health workers. World in Harmony provided funding and organizational support to make those things happen. Educational scholarships became a major focus. The organization worked extensively in the United States, granting scholarships to members of the Hopi Native American community to complete their secondary and higher education. Irene was particularly interested in supporting indigenous communities, trying to preserve their cultural identity while accessing modern education. The organization supported an art school in Arizona that taught Hopi traditions, values, and philosophies. The school wasn't about preparing students for commercial art careers. It was about preserving cultural knowledge that was in danger of disappearing, ensuring that younger generations understood and valued their heritage. In Greece, despite the complicated history between Irene and her homeland, World in Harmony worked extensively with various institutions and foundations. The organization provided food aid to impoverished regions, supplied school materials to students in areas where families couldn't afford basic supplies, and funded medicine for refugee infants and children. When natural disasters struck Greece, whether earthquakes, floods, or fires, World in Harmony was among the first organizations to provide assistance. Irene might have lived in Spain, might have renounced her Greek citizenship, but she never stopped caring about the country of her birth. The organization also supported groups working with children with special needs, funding programs that provided education, therapy, and support services. Again, these weren't high-profile projects that generated media coverage. They were practical efforts to help families and children who had been left behind by inadequate social services. Animal welfare remained central to World in Harmony's mission. Beyond the original cow transportation project, the organization worked to prevent unnecessary animal slaughter, reduce food waste in developed countries, and promote more ethical treatment of animals in agricultural systems. Irene donated her entire inheritance from her parents to World in Harmony. King Paul and Queen Frederica had left their children a substantial estate, enough to ensure financial security for life. Irene took her share and gave all of it to the organization. She kept nothing for herself. She lived modestly in her single room at Zarzuela Palace. She drew no salary from World in Harmony, despite serving as its president and doing virtually all of the organizational work. She had no personal fortune, no savings, no investments. Everything went to the cause. Her family thought she was mad. Even Sophia, who supported her sister's work, worried about Irene's complete financial self-deprivation. What would happen when she was old? What if she needed expensive medical care? How would she support herself? But Irene had no interest in these practical concerns. She had lived in palaces. She had worn royal jewels. She had experienced material luxury. None of it meant anything compared to the work. She told interviewers that she could serve the world through private means, that this was how history evolved, through individual choices to act with compassion. She served as president of World in Harmony from its founding in 1986 until 2023, a span of 37 years. The organization became her identity, her purpose, her life's work. When people asked who she didn't say she was a princess or the Queen's sister. She said she was president of World in Harmony. In 2023, her declining health made it impossible to continue. The cognitive impairment that would eventually take her life was already affecting her ability to manage the complex organizational work. The board of World in Harmony, recognizing that the organization couldn't function without Irene's personal involvement and leadership, made the difficult decision to wind down operations. The organization's work ended in 2024. For Irene, watching something she had built over nearly 4 decades come to an end must have been devastating. But she had always known that World in Harmony was tied to her personal involvement. She had never built it to outlast her. She had built it to do as much good as possible while she was capable of leading it. And the good it did was substantial, touching thousands of lives across 3 continents, providing education, healthcare, food, and hope to people who had been forgotten by wealthier nations and more powerful institutions. The Spanish Princess. Decades passed in Madrid. Irene attended cultural events with Sofia, always slightly to the side, never seeking the spotlight. She accompanied her sister to concerts, art exhibitions, and museums. Their shared love of archaeology continued, and they often discussed their earlier work at Dekelia. In 2000, Irene donated a selection of rare books and archaeological artifacts from the family collection to the Benaki Museum in Athens, ensuring that Greek cultural treasures remained accessible to scholars and the public. In 2002, she faced a health crisis when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. True to her private nature, the diagnosis and treatment were handled with outstanding discretion. She underwent chemotherapy and eventually overcame the disease. The family rallied around her, but details were kept carefully hidden from the press. In 2007, she became godmother to Simeon Hassan of Bulgaria, with King Mohammed, the Sixth of Morocco, serving as godfather. The ceremony took place at St. John of Rila Church at Zarska Bistrica, connecting her once again to the network of European royalty that had defined her birth, but never quite contained her spirit. By 2018, Irene had lived in Spain for nearly 4 decades. That year, she made her final break with Greece. On March 16, 2018, she obtained Spanish nationality through a special process known as Carta de Naturaleza, granted by the government through royal decree. The decree cited exceptional circumstances, noting that she maintained close personal ties with all members of the Spanish royal family and had a special bond with Spain. To obtain Spanish citizenship, she had to renounce her Greek nationality. After 76 years as a Greek princess, Irene became a Spanish citizen. The symbolism was clear. Spain was her home. Sofia was her family. Greece was the past. Infanta Cristina, Sofia's younger daughter, had named her daughter Irene in 2005 in honor of her aunt. The gesture meant everything to Irene, who had no children of her own, but had helped raise Sofia's 3 children. The final years. In November 2023, the Spanish royal household quietly announced that Princess Irene was suffering from cognitive impairment. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. The sharp mind that had studied philosophy in Madras, mastered complex piano concertos, and managed an international humanitarian organization was beginning to fail. Sofia adapted her schedule to accommodate Irene's condition, reducing public engagements and spending more time at Zarzuela Palace. The sisters, who had been close since childhood, became even more inseparable. Irene's last public appearance was at the wedding of her nephew and godson, Prince Nikolaos, in February 2025 in Athens. She attended in a wheelchair, a shadow of the vibrant woman who had once commanded audiences at the Royal Festival Hall. But she was there, present for family, fulfilling the obligations that mattered to her even as her health declined. By the summer of 2025, her condition worsened significantly. She withdrew entirely from the few public activities she had maintained, always accompanying Sofia to cultural events and concerts. On January 13th, 2026, the Spanish royal household announced that Irene's condition had worsened critically. Queen Sofia immediately cancelled all public engagements to be at her sister's side. For 2 days, Sofia remained with Irene, holding vigil as the end approached. On January 15th, 2026, at 11:40 in the morning, Princess Irene of Greece and Denmark died at the Palace of Zarzuela in Madrid, surrounded by loved ones. She was 83 years old. The announcement from the Spanish royal household was brief and formal. Their Majesties the King and Queen, and Her Majesty Queen Sofia, regretted to announce the passing of Her Royal Highness Princess Irene of Greece. But behind the formal language lay a deeper grief. Sofia had lost her closest companion, her confidant, her sister. The funeral. After private services at the Palace of Zarzuela, Irene's body, escorted by the royal guard, was laid in repose at the Cathedral of St. Andrew and St. Demetrius in Madrid on January 17th. Royals from across Europe began gathering for the funeral. Then her remains were transferred to Greece, to the country she had left behind, but never stopped being connected to through blood and history. On January 20th, 2026, the funeral took place at the Metropolitan Cathedral of Athens. Royals from across Europe attended. Queen Sofia arrived with her daughter Infanta Cristina, visibly emotional. King Felipe, Queen Letizia, Princess Leonor, and Infanta Sofia were there. Queen Anne-Marie, widow of Constantine II, comforted Sofia as tears fell. Crown Prince Pavlos gave a eulogy, speaking about an aunt who had chosen an unconventional path but had remained devoted to family. Prince Nikolaos spoke about a godmother who had shown him that being royal didn't mean conforming to expectations. After the service, the family travelled to the royal cemetery at Tatoi. Irene was laid to rest alongside her parents, King Paul and Queen Frederica, and her brother, Constantine II, who had died in 2023. The Greek royal family, scattered by coups and referendums, reunited in death in the soil of the homeland they had lost. Sofia held a Greek flag during the funeral procession, a gesture that spoke to everything Irene had been. Greek by birth, Spanish by choice, but never quite belonging entirely to either country. She had been her own person, carving a path that satisfied her intellect, her spirituality, and her deep compassion for others. The legacy. Princess Irene of Greece and Denmark lived 83 years without ever quite fitting the mold of what a princess should be. She never married. She never had children. She never sought power or position. Instead, she pursued music until her mentor died, then shifted to humanitarian work and spiritual seeking. She lived through 2 world wars' aftermath, 2 military coups, multiple exiles, and the complete dissolution of her family's monarchy. She watched her sister become a queen, while she remained simply the queen's sister. She could have been bitter about playing second to Sofia's starring role. Instead, she chose her own path entirely. Her interests in Hindu philosophy, paranormal phenomena, and animal welfare marked her as eccentric in royal circles that prized conformity. Her choice to remain unmarried in an era when marriage was considered a princess's primary duty was radical. Her donation of her entire inheritance to charity was unprecedented. But perhaps her most remarkable quality was her quiet contentment with a supporting role. She understood that she didn't need a throne or a title to make a difference. Her work through World in Harmony touched thousands of lives. Her presence beside Sofia provided stability and companionship through decades of public service. Her role as surrogate mother to Sophia's children enriched all their lives. She once said she had no status, that she was nothing more than the Queen's sister. But that wasn't quite true. She was a concert pianist who performed at the Royal Festival Hall. She was an archaeologist who co-published scholarly work. She was a philosopher who studied under respected teachers in India. She was a humanitarian who founded an organization that helped people across 3 continents. She was a woman who chose her own path and walked it with dignity until the very end. The shadow she supposedly lived in was of her own choosing. She could have sought the spotlight. She chose not to. That's not living in shadow. That's wisdom. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.